So good morning. We have a 2008 Colorado here for an intermittent no crank condition. Back in February of this year, I replaced this fuse panel because the run crank relay terminals were all corroded and it wasn't powering up the ECM fuses. And it was fine for a while, but apparently now it occasionally will not crank. I'm not sure if it's got a network issue going on or if it's just a simple starter problem. So we're going to do a network code scan and see what comes up on this thing to start with. So we're going to do a network code scan and see what comes up on this vehicle. I'm wondering if it just got a conventional starter problem. Customer doesn't say that the ABS light or traction control light or stability control messages are coming up. Only light on the dash was tire pressure monitor. Tire pressure monitor, no codes in anything else. So if there was a network issue going on, I'm sure it would have network fault codes. And the battery hasn't been recently disconnected because all the monitors are running past. So I'm leaning towards a potential basic starter problem. Let's see if we can look at how the starter circuit is controlled on this thing. So here's a look at the starter control circuit. Here's the starter motor down here. If we follow that back from the S terminal, it goes to the starter relay. The starter relay is grounded at G102 all the time, and it's power side controlled by the ECM. If there was a problem with the control side of the starter relay, there should be a starter relay code. Obviously the ignition switch is an input to the BCM. The BCM communicates across the network to the ECM. The ECM checks with the transmission controls to make sure it's in park or neutral. Now that could be a problem if it's not in park or neutral, or the park neutral switch is malfunctioning. It may prevent it from cranking. Customer reports that they just simply wait a few minutes and the vehicle starts as if nothing was wrong. But given the fact that there are no network codes, I'm leaning towards just a starter intermittent problem with the starter itself. So I guess a visual inspection of the starter connections and cables at the starter is in order. The starter relay was replaced with the relay center back in February. So to add complications to the matter, this thing has a aftermarket car starter. Now the lock and unlock features of this car starter work, but my understanding is you press and hold this key switch button to start the vehicle, and that doesn't work. I see the hood pin switch is seized closed, so it simulates the hood being closed anyways, but that could complicate this intermittent no crank condition. So here we're looking at data related to the starter. Here's our crank request signal, our park neutral position switch, and the starter relay. Unfortunately though, it has to act up while we're trying to diagnose it in order to figure out if there's a problem with the park neutral switch. I'm going to turn the key off and back on and then watch this park neutral switch as I move the shifter to see if it's intermittently not indicating park. Well, unfortunately nothing's acting up right now, of course. I went and moved it from park reverse several times, shut it off and started it several times, and every time it responded. So I think what I'm going to do is talk to the customer about the car starter and see if they're using it. I don't think it works, so that could complicate things. I think we might put a temporary test light on the S terminal of the starter and wire it up so that the customer can watch the test light, or I can watch the test light every time I start the vehicle to see if it's an actual starter problem. So we're underneath this canyon looking for the starter. There it is, way up there. GM is so proud of this starter, they built the rest of the truck around it. So you can see the purple wire going into the starter. That's the control wire. I can barely see it, let alone get a test probe on it. Wow. That's not pretty. Wonder what you got to do to take this starter out of here. Probably inner fender skirt, steering shaft. I don't think the fender skirt's going to help because the frame's in the way. Lovely. So I've got 3 test lights wired across. This one here, an LED test light wired across the control side of the starter relay. This one wired across the output side of the starter relay. And this one wired back pinning the S terminal at the starter. I managed to get a pin into the weather pack sealed terminal. So when we crank it, all 3 lights should come on. And as you can see, they are. So we're going to keep trying this thing, use it for a day or so and see if we can get it to stop working. So I've started this thing at least a dozen times now. I let it sit overnight and started it cold, and everything's working fine now. So I've got this test light wired to the S terminal at the starter, and this test light wired across the control side of the starter relay here, and the output side, input-output side of the starter relay. And of course all 3 test lights come on. So considering that it's a 5 to 6 hour job to change the starter, I'd like to make sure, or try to make sure. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to more permanently install this test light going to the S terminal up on the corner of the hood here so it can be watched. And I'm going to take this other stuff off the starter relay and let the customer drive it with instructions to watch the test light. And if it doesn't come on one day, well, we know we have a control circuit problem. If it doesn't start one day and that light is on, then we have a starter problem. So I put a test light out in the corner of the side of the hood there where it's visible from the driver's seat. So when you start the vehicle, the light should come on every time. Now this problem has happened 3 times in 3 months. The next time it happens, you'll be able to tell me if the light is on. If the light is on, if the light comes on and the starter doesn't respond, we need a starter. If the light doesn't come on and the starter doesn't respond, then we got problems with the control circuit somewhere. Let's leave it for that for now, and I'll post a follow-up when this thing fails.